So, as we talk about hiring, we recognize that there are different kinds of challenges that you may be facing. Some may be focused on diversifying the applicant pool, some may be focused on diversifying your staff. Others may be looking at hiring practices that you have as a school district or organization and examining how inclusive and equitable those are. And so, we recognize that there are connections between diversity, equity, and inclusion, but that they are also unique in their own right. And so, I just want to share briefly a statement from a mentor and friend, Derica Blackman, who once said that diversity is a fact, inclusion is a strategy, belonging is a measure, and equity is the goal. So often these words get bundled together so much that they become interchangeable or almost indistinguishable. And we want to just bring a level of clarity and distinction to them. Diversity is the presence of variety, different thoughts, backgrounds, identities, and approaches. Inclusion is about the strategies that we use to incorporate everyone in all communities. Belonging is the measure that we use to assess if those inclusion efforts are working effectively. But equity is the goal, right? The tailoring of support to ensure that everyone can thrive, and the recognition of the historical context and the cultural backgrounds that inform who we are and how we move through the world. And so, it is the culture and systems level change that not only identifies, but radically changes the policies, the practices, and the systems that have excluded others.
All right. And so now we're going to talk a little bit more about the specific processes that you might want to examine within your hiring experience. So the question that we have as a focus here is, what is your approach to creating a process that promotes diversity, creates inclusion, and creates opportunities for potential equitable recruitment of talents? So some of the things to think through here. So having rubrics, having anti-bias trainings, that is an important starting point and something that is already part of the hiring culture and process at a lot of organizations, but it shouldn't be the stopping point. So sometimes we forget that as you're going through a hiring process, it is an investment for candidates too. So you really want to think about what are some of the things that you can do to build on those anti-bias trainings and those rubrics to really ensure a more sustainable, equitable system. So what it is, reflecting and designing changes to the duration and touch points of your hiring system. Again, thinking about things like what are some of the barriers that your talent pool might experience in your process that you can help address. So for example, you might be having several interviews and people are having to take time off from their current job for each of these interviews, or maybe they need to find childcare, multiple points in the process, transportation costs can add up. So those are just a few examples, but really kind of putting yourself in the shoes of your talent pool and thinking about, what do these touch points look like? What does the duration of the process look like? Are these things that are going to be a burden for your talent pool? Are there ways that you can help support your candidates throughout the process so it's not so much of a burden, so you can alleviate some of those frustrations and challenges that might end up excluding some people in the process. And then next is allowing fit to be discussed without thinking about what are some specific data and metrics that you're looking for. So I think fit is one of those things that, it does kind of come up in hiring conversations without people recognizing the inherent bias that is pulled out in those conversations. So when you're thinking about things like, does this person really fit in with our culture? Is this someone who we could see being a colleague and see, being part of our organization, of our district? Inherently, you're looking for traits that are going to be sort of reflective of what the community currently looks like. So if you're looking at having a more equitable hiring system, that's going to be inherently biased. So what we encourage districts to do is think about the notion of what does it mean to really be successful. So what are some of the objective needs that you have? What are some of the clear metrics and clear skill sets that you actually that candidates actually do need to have to be successful, and focusing less on some of those biases that might be more about personality or culture or fit. All right. And then lastly, having a process that's designed for all and used for the underrepresented. So again, I think this is a challenge that we often see where districts really just sort of have a one-size-fits-all process where they're really not thinking about what are some of those barriers and challenges that underrepresented communities might be experiencing. So making sure that your process rejects all forms of bias and assumptions, elevating blind spots of the designers. So sort of thinking about what is the more user-friendly approach that you can have for those underrepresented communities, as opposed to designing a process that is intended to serve all people people, which will inherently disenfranchise or make the process a little bit more difficult for your underrepresented communities. And so some of the challenges or some of the ideas to think about here are your policies. So again, with that referral process, what are some things you can do to ensure that it's a more equitable approach? Is it something that you want to continue? Do you want to encourage people, if you are going to have a referral process, how are you going to encourage building out a process that invites more diversity into the talent pool? So sometimes you want to think about your job descriptions and review and think about, is it really clear what the metrics are that you're looking for? How are your descriptions going to ensure that people do feel invited and everyone who is qualified is going to apply, as opposed to people who just sort of feel, maybe marginalized by that description or your process? So what are some of those policies that you want to revisit? And again, we really encourage districts to kind of do a thorough audit or check to kind of go through the experience from start to finish to understand what are the policies that you might want to shift to ensure that everyone feels invited to be in the process or to apply for your opportunities. And then practices. So interview debrief process. How are you collecting information and data that you can use to understand what the challenges and burdens might be for a more diverse talent pool? Even internally, what does your debrief look like? What are the metrics that you're looking at? Are you having conversations that are focused more on culture or fit internally, as opposed to really evaluating candidates objectively for the value that they can bring to your organization? And then people. So thinking about things like who's on your interviewing committee. Is this reflective of the community at large? What are the voices that you want to amplify and include to ensure that everyone feels invited and that you have a community of interviewers that is reflective of the community at large?